headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.
Let's talk to the Chief Executive of the Freedom Association, Andrew Allison. Good evening, Andrew.
Good evening, Kevin.
Now, these disinformation specialists, only the BBC could come up with a term like that. Who decides what's disinformation and what's not? Who decides what they feel is going to be acceptable for these unvaccinated members of the studio audience to say? Who's making these decisions, and what are the criteria?
Well, I can tell you that I'm not making that decision, and I'm pretty sure that you're not. And there's going to be someone inside the BBC who's going to be making these decisions. As you said, it's quite right for the BBC to reflect that millions of people in this country have decided that they're not going to accept a vaccine, which is their right to do so. So it's good that some of those views are going to be aired on Question Time. But disinformation specialists, you're right, or the BBC could come up with something like that. I mean, what are they looking for? Are they looking for people who are activists, perhaps? Yes. People who have got quite a following on social media, who are arguing against vaccination. Are those people not going to be welcome on the show? Is that what they're going to say? Or do they just want ordinary people, in inverted commas, who've chosen not to have a vaccine to go on the show? I think it needs a mix of people, doesn't it, to have a proper debate.
Now, if you think of hardcore anti-vaxxers, and by the way, people who decide not to have the vaccine are not by any means necessarily anti-vaxxers. But when we talk about hardcore anti-vaxxers, people who are against vaccines of all shapes and colours, what sort of worries me is I bet they won't allow them in there. And the point about being an anti-vaxxer is it's become demonised to the extent where it's supposed to be sort of almost against the law. But I don't agree with them, but it's a valid viewpoint to have. Why are they never allowed a platform to say what they think, to voice their beliefs, to tell us their opinions?
We have seen right throughout the whole of this pandemic with the various restrictions, haven't we, at Downing Street press conferences, where BBC journalists and journalists from other major broadcasters have been asking the government why they aren't going further on restrictions, why aren't they doing this, that and the other. They've clearly bought into the narrative and they're basically supporting the government's policies, even though when it comes to Beth Rigby and Kay Burley, of course, who have the nerve to question ministers now and question Boris Johnson for what has allegedly happened in Downing Street, lest we forget that they were...
Be fair, Andrew. Be fair, Andrew. They're able to employ their expertise on illegal parties when they do these interviews. They know exactly what they're talking about.
well, indeed. But I mean, the case of Beth Rigby, I mean, there wasn't even a hint of irony on her face when she was quizzing the Prime Minister for about
furiously.
5 minutes.
She was really angry, wasn't she?
Well, she really was. Yeah, she was suspended for about 3 months from Sky News. But I do think, going back to the point, I think a lot of these broadcasters have just bought into this, and that is their view, and that's the reason why they're not allowing other people to have their say. But what is the definition of an anti-vaxxer these days, though, Kev?
I don't know. That's a good point.
I mean, if you look at what's been happening in Canada, I mean, the truckers, 50,000 of them that have gone from the West Coast right across to the east to the capital in Ottawa, and they're protesting against vaccine mandates. Perfectly reasonable, you would think, not particularly anti-vaxxers.
No.
But Justin Trudeau has called them a small minority, which they're not. That they hold unacceptable views, and then of course he's gone into hiding straight away after that. But the definition of an anti-vaxxer seems to be changing all the time.
But I mean, in terms of vaccines, in terms of the COVID crisis, in my view, there's no such thing as an unacceptable view. There may be views. There may be views that I don't agree with. And it plays into this Spotify row. I mean, Joe Rogan, the podcaster's offence in terms of what Neil Young and Joni Mitchell say. They say he's spreading misinformation and therefore so by extension of Spotify. His crime was to have two doctors on who put forward opinions that neither Neil Young nor Joni Mitchell agree with. That's what this is about. It's about an intolerance to other people's opinions. That's what I mean about anti-vaxxers. I don't agree with anti-vaxxers, but I don't understand why they're demonised almost to the point of criminality. Oh, well, they're anti-vaxxers. Oh, look at the Freedom Marches, anti-vaxxers. Well, so
Yes.
what? What's wrong with being an anti-vaxxer?
Well, it's just the same sort of insults that they throw around. If you're mildly criticise, rather, forget my words out, of Islam, then you're Islamophobic. If you may disagree with equal marriage, then you're homophobic. If you believe that perhaps it isn't all our fault that we have climate change, the climate change happens anyway, then I'm afraid you're a flat earther and you're a climate change denier. These are just insults that the people just hurl around without really giving them any thought. They certainly don't help a debate. And what I've really enjoyed in these past few weeks is listening to doctors and to nurses on television and radio explaining why they won't have a vaccine. You can't call them anti-vaxxers at all. They're not. They're actually coming up with some very good, reasonable arguments why they feel that they shouldn't have it. So you just can't keep hurling around all this abuse and be expected to be taken seriously.
Indeed. And as I say, it doesn't matter where you come from in this argument. This is about tolerance of other people's opinions. Now, as I say, I don't agree with anti-vaxxers. I think they're wrong. However, I don't understand why we're not allowed to listen to anything they say, as if they're the devil incarnate. In fact, this is what our final point really, Andrew, is with Question Time and their disinformation specialists. Why don't they just invite a selection of people who haven't had the vaccination for whatever reason, including anti-vaxxers, and let these people say what they think, let them deliver their opinions on television, and then you, me, and every other halfway intelligent viewer can make up their own minds. We don't need to be parented and mollycoddled and cosseted by the BBC's disinformation specialists, do we?
No, you've been reading my thoughts there, because I was going to move on to that, Kevin. I'm sure that the people who watch Question Time at home can actually make up their own minds about just about any political subject, any medical subject, any subject under the sun. They can make up their own minds. And that's all that we need. So, yes, you're right. Some of the people who believe that Bill Gates is injecting microchips into your arm, well, I regard them as nutters, to be perfectly honest. But, if they want to express that to you, let them express that to you.
Exactly.
But the majority of people, we've got a friend who's in her early 30s. She's got a child who's about 9 now, I think, 9 or 10 years old. And she said, I don't believe that I'm at any risk of COVID, and that if I have a vaccine, maybe I put myself more of a risk for having the vaccine. Now, she's made that decision, and that's her decision. It's not up to the rest of us to actually say, well, you're wrong, and try to force her into doing it, or as some other countries are trying to do, prevent her from going into shops other than grocery stores. Even in Australia, in Western Australia now, you can go into a grocery store if you haven't received a vaccine and buy food. But now, if you want to buy a bottle of wine, any form of booze with it, I'm afraid, unless you've received the vaccine, you can't buy the booze. It's just cruel. It's forcing people into doing things that they don't want to do. And it's just profoundly illiberal and authoritarian. And it really has to end.
Yeah, it should be remembered at the bottom of all of this that people have the right to be wrong. In a free society.
I've been many times. Yeah. I've been wrong many times.
I live my life by that principle. No, but seriously, people have the right to be wrong, and it doesn't matter what reason they decide to not to have the vaccine. If after persuasion they stick to that line and they're not going to have the vaccine, that is their business. In this country, in free countries, you have the right to be wrong, and you have the right to make up your own decisions about this, and we have the right to be able to make up our own minds about what the non-vaccination say no to the jabs mob want to say when they're on Question Time. It insults our intelligence to say that we need disinformation specialists to make sure that we're not assailed by dangerous information. It's just ridiculous. Andrew, always a pleasure to speak.
Good talk. Hot talk.
Bold talk. Talk radio.
Listen on your smart speaker.
Watch it live on your smart TV.
The world headquarters of common sense.
Talk Radio.